What happens to gold, gemstones, and heavy minerals after a flood? Most people think floods bring treasure. They don't. Floods don't create gold, and they don't create gems. What they do is much more interesting. They rearrange everything. Over the years, I've noticed the same pattern again and again. After big floods or heavy rains, people suddenly start finding gold, sometimes gemstones too, and almost everyone says the same thing. The flood brought it here. That sounds reasonable, but it's wrong. Floods are not delivery trucks. They are sorting machines. When water becomes stronger, faster, and more chaotic, it doesn't treat all material the same. Light material gets pushed farther. Fine sediment gets washed away. Heavy material behaves very differently. Gold doesn't float around looking for a new home. It resists movement. It drops early. It sinks. And when the water finally slows down, gold is one of the first things to stop. That's why floods feel like they reveal gold. Not because gold arrived, but because everything lighter was removed. The same thing happens with certain gemstones and heavy minerals. They don't appear out of nowhere. They were already there, hidden under layers of sand, mud, and noise. Floods strip away the noise. And once you understand that, floods stop looking random. They start looking like information. In the next part, we'll look at exactly what floods do to gold step by step, and why gold reacts so predictably when water energy increases. Let's start with gold, because it tells the clearest story. Gold is extremely heavy, much heavier than sand, gravel, or most common rock. When a flood hits, the river suddenly gains power. The water moves faster, deeper, and wider than usual. At first, everything moves: sand, dirt, small stones. But very quickly, gravity starts winning. As soon as the water begins to lose energy, gold drops out. Not at the end of the flood, but early, long before lighter material settles. That's why after a flood, gold is often found closer to bedrock, low points, and natural traps. The flood didn't bring it there. The flood pushed everything else out of the way. I like to think of it this way. A normal river slowly hides gold. A flood presses the reset button. It scours channels deeper. It cleans cracks in bedrock. It removes soft material that built up over time. And when the water level finally drops, gold is often sitting closer to the surface than it was before. This is also why floods can make old gold areas productive again. Not because new gold appeared, but because old gold became reachable. One mistake I see people make is rushing in too fast after a flood. Fresh ground looks exciting, but excitement isn't the goal. Observation is, after a flood, the land is talking. New gravel bars, exposed rock, strange concentrations of heavy material. These are clues, not guarantees. Floods don't reward speed, they reward understanding. In the next part, we'll talk about what happens to gemstones and other heavy minerals during floods, and why some stones show up together with gold, while others don't. Now let's talk about gemstones and other heavy minerals, because floods treat them differently than gold, but the logic is the same. Most gemstones don't sparkle when they're found in nature. They don't look like jewelry. They look like ordinary stones, often dull, often scratched, and usually mixed in with gravel. That's why people walk right past them. Gemstones like garnet, sapphire, ruby, spinel, and even diamonds in very specific regions all share a few important traits. They are hard, they are dense, and they don't break down easily. When a flood hits, lighter material is stripped away first, mud goes, fine sand goes, organic debris goes. What's left behind becomes more concentrated. Gemstones don't float to the surface during a flood. They settle with other heavy material. They move only when water energy is high, and they stop as soon as that energy drops. That's why gemstones often appear together with black sand and other heavy minerals after floods. They travel the same path. They obey the same rules. One mistake people make is assuming that if they don't see gold, there's nothing valuable there. That's not true. In some environments, gemstones are actually more common than gold, especially in ancient river systems. Another mistake is assuming every colorful stone is a gem. Floods don't turn ordinary rock into treasure. They only separate what was already special from what wasn't. After floods, gemstones are usually found in gravel bars. low pockets, and areas where coarse material collects. If everything around you feels light and soft, you're probably in the wrong place. I've learned to pay attention to what stays behind after water leaves. If heavy material concentrates in one spot, it's telling you something about the energy of that flow. Gold tells one story, gemstones tell another, but floods are the editor that highlights both. In the next part, we'll talk about heavy minerals, black sand, and why seeing them together is often a better sign than seeing gold alone. Now let's talk about heavy minerals, because this is where many people either get confused or get very close without realizing it. Heavy minerals are the quiet companions of gold and gemstones. They don't get much attention, but they are often better indicators than gold itself. Materials like magnetite, hematite, ilmenite, and other dense minerals behave in very predictable ways during floods. They sink quickly, they resist movement, and they concentrate where energy drops. That's why black sand matters. Black sand is not gold, but it travels with gold. It settles where gold settles. And when you see it collecting in layers or pockets, it means the water slowed down enough to drop heavy material. I've learned to trust black sand more than shine. Shine can lie. Weight and behavior rarely do. During floods, heavy minerals often form distinct lines, streaks, or patches. These aren't random. They mark moments when water energy changed. Each layer is a record of movement and pause. One common mistake is thinking that black sand means gold is guaranteed. It doesn't. But no black sand usually means no gold either. Heavy minerals are like punctuation marks in geology. They tell you where to pause and look closer. Another mistake is ignoring places where heavy minerals look messy or concentrated in strange ways. Clean, uniform ground usually means everything kept moving. Messy ground often means something stopped. After floods, I look for contrast. Heavy material sitting next to lighter material. Dark minerals trapped against lighter gravel. These contrasts show where sorting happened. Gold, gemstones, and heavy minerals don't need luck to be found. They need the right conditions to stop. And floods are very good at creating those conditions. In the next part, we'll talk about where floods leave their strongest signatures and how to read fresh flood deposits without rushing in and making mistakes. Now let's talk about where floods leave their strongest signatures, because this is where many people rush in and miss the point. After a flood, everything looks new. Fresh gravel, exposed rock, changed channels, and that excitement makes people move too fast. I've learned to slow down right after a flood, because floods don't just move material, they leave clues. The strongest flood signatures usually appear where water lost energy suddenly, not gradually, suddenly. Places like newly formed gravel bars, the edges of receding water lines, in areas where coarse material piles up next to finer sediment. These transitions matter. If you see a clean sweep of fine sand, that means everything kept moving. If you see mixed sizes, coarse gravel, stones, and heavy material together, that's a place where sorting happened. Freshly exposed bedrock is another major signal. Floods often strip away years of buildup in a single event. Cracks that were buried become visible again. Grooves get cleaned out. These are not new features. They're old traps made accessible. One mistake I see often is people assuming the newest looking material is the best. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the real value sits just beside it, where the flood energy dropped slightly earlier. Flood deposits are layered stories. Each layer represents a change in speed, depth, or direction. If you rush, you miss those changes. I like to observe before touching anything. Where did the water slow first? Where did it slow last? Where does heavy material appear to stall? After floods, the ground is temporarily honest. It shows you what moved and what stayed. That honesty doesn't last long. Normal flow returns, sediment builds up again, the window closes. Floods don't give unlimited opportunity, they give brief clarity. In the next part, we'll talk about the most common mistakes people make after floods and how to avoid turning good information into wasted effort. Now let's talk about the mistakes people make after floods, because this is where good information turns into wasted effort. The first mistake is rushing in too fast. Fresh ground creates excitement, and excitement creates bad decisions. People start digging before they've finished observing. They see exposed gravel and think opportunity, when sometimes it's just movement without concentration. Floods reveal information, not guarantees. The second mistake is focusing only on what looks new. Bright, freshly deposited material catches the eye. But gold, gemstones, and heavy minerals don't always stop in the newest layer. Often they settle just beneath it or along the boundary where movement slowed slightly earlier. Another common mistake is ignoring scale. A flood that rearranged a small creek behaves very differently from one that reshaped an entire river. The size of the system matters. Expecting the same results everywhere leads to disappointment. I've also seen people chase shine after floods. Freshly washed stones can look impressive. Colors pop, surfaces sparkle, but floods clean rocks. They don't upgrade them. Shiny doesn't mean heavy, and heavy is what matters. One of the biggest mistakes is assuming that floods bring gold from far away. In reality, floods usually move gold short distances. They concentrate, they expose, they reposition slightly. They don't deliver treasure across landscapes. That misunderstanding leads people to search randomly instead of reading patterns. I try to remind myself of one simple rule after floods. If I can't explain why heavy material would stop here, I move on. Floods reward thinking, not effort. In the final part, we'll pull everything together into a simple way of reading flood-altered ground, so you know what to check, what to ignore, and when to walk away. Now let's pull everything together, because floods make sense only when you look at the whole picture. Floods don't create gold, gemstones, or heavy minerals. They reveal them by removing what doesn't matter and concentrating what does. Once you understand that, flood-altered ground stops looking chaotic and starts looking readable. Here's the simple way I read a place after a flood. First, I ask where the energy changed. Where did fast water slow down? Where did depth increase or decrease suddenly? Those changes are where sorting happens. Second, I look for what stayed behind. Heavy material that didn't move far. Black sand, coarse gravel, dense stones sitting where lighter material is gone. What remains tells you more than what disappeared. Third, I check structure. Bedrock cracks, low points, and natural barriers still matter after floods. Floods don't erase geology, they highlight it. Fourth, I look for consistency. One sign alone means very little, but when heavy minerals, gravel size, water behavior, and ground shape all point to the same place, that's when I slow down. And here's the most important part. I don't try to check everything. Floods create information everywhere, but opportunity only in a few places. Knowing when to walk away is just as important as knowing when to stay. Over time, I've learned that floods reward calm thinking. They punish rushing. The people who do best aren't the ones who move first. They're the ones who observe longest. If you remember only one idea from this video, remember this. Floods are not chaos. They are filters. They strip away what doesn't belong and expose what was already there. And once you learn to read those filters, you stop chasing luck. You start reading the land. In the next video, we'll go deeper into how to tell gold from gemstones and other heavy minerals in flood gravels, without guesswork and without expensive tools. Before we end, I want to leave you with one final thought. Floods don't change the rules of geology. They just make those rules easier to see. Gold, gemstones, and heavy minerals don't suddenly appear after a flood. They were already part of the system. The flood simply removed what was hiding them. If you take anything from this video, let it be this. Don't rush, don't guess, and don't chase shine. Slow down. Observe how water moved. Look for what stayed behind. Pay attention to weight, not color, and always ask yourself why something stopped where it did. You don't need luck to understand floods. You need patience and a willingness to let the land explain itself. In the next video, we'll take this one step further and talk about how to tell gold from gemstones and other heavy minerals in flood gravels using simple observations instead of expensive tools. If this video helped you see floods differently, consider subscribing and let me know in the comments what kind of terrain you're near. Rivers, creeks, hills, or flat ground. Thanks for watching.